The first time I saw Mahatma Gandhi was sometime in 1920 when he visited Patna in connection with his first non-cooperation movement. I was then a student in the Patna College in second year science. I still recollect how large that meeting was, one of the greatest meetings, biggest meetings that I have seen. And one fact particularly stands out. During his speech, before Gandhiji started to speak, he made an appeal to the audience for contributions, and volunteers went around with their caps or with their handkerchiefs or any kind of cloth that they had, and collections were made while Gandhiji was speaking. And after he finished, all the coins that had been donated were brought to the platform, and they were all put into a big sheet of cloth, and somebody tried to lift all the coins. It was so heavy that this man found it difficult to lift it. So much had been collected. After that, I don't think I ever saw him. That time I didn't meet him at all. It was a few months after this that I myself joined the non-cooperation movement. This was in 1921 in January. During the movement, I don't think I again had a darshan of Gandhiji. Then I went away to the United States in 1922 for my studies. During my stay there, my wife Prabhavati was sent by her father to Gandhiji's ashram at Sabarmati. Her father, Sri Vajkishore Prasad, the topmost lawyer in the district court at Darbhanga, had also joined the non-cooperation movement. He was one of the earliest to do that, and he became the top leader of the Bihar nationalist movement. I mean the freedom movement in Bihar, the head of the Congress organization and all that there. Rajendra Prasad ji, who became the first president of India, came after him. When I returned from the United States in 1929, November, my wife had come to meet me, and after I stayed with my parents for a while, both of us, my wife and I, left for Wardha, where Gandhiji was living at that time. That was the first time. This was, I think, early in December 1929. This was the first time that I had a meeting with Gandhiji, and because of my wife's place in his heart, I was treated as a member of the family. It was there that I met Mr. Nehru also for the first time, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and I was quite taken up with him. After that, when the Congress Working Committee was also meeting there at that time, and I met a few other leaders, but most of the time I sat around where Gandhiji was talking to other people and watched him, and I don't think we had much talk amongst ourselves. I don't remember very much of it in any case. After a few days, I left with Gandhiji and his party for Delhi, and from Delhi to Lahore, where the famous session of the Indian National Congress was held at the end of 1929, where complete independence was declared as the goal of India and the goal of the Indian National Congress. On the way, Gandhiji had stopped at Delhi to meet the Viceroy to plead with him for the pardon of the death sentences that had been passed on Sardar Bhagat Singh and his two colleagues. Gandhiji did his best to persuade the Viceroy to convert the sentence, the death sentence, into life sentence, but he was unable to move the Viceroy. It was a few months after the Lahore Congress that Sardar Bhagat Singh and his two comrades were hanged on the banks of the Ravi near Lahore. That was one of the most tragic incidents in our national history, which made an indelible mark, particularly on the minds of the youth of India. And that one incident, I think, alienated the youth of the country much more from the British than any other single event, I think, had done before. After all, Bhagat Singh and his comrades were not criminals. They had been idolized by the whole country for their bravery, and even though they followed the path of violence, Gandhiji recognized their burning patriotism and their heroism, and as the country as a whole did. After the Lahore Congress, I joined the All India Congress Committee office as the secretary of its labor department, and thereby began my close association with the Congress during the days of freedom struggle and with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. After that, of course, I had several occasions to meet Gandhiji at Congress meetings. Soon after I had joined the AICC, when Mr. Nehru became president of the Congress the second time, he invited me to join his working committee, and in 1936, and thereafter, of course, at every meeting with the working committee, Gandhiji used to be present, with very rare exceptions, and I not only saw him but saw him at work, discussed things with him, and so on and so forth. I must make it clear here that at that time I was a socialist and a Marxian socialist, and had my differences with Gandhiji and his philosophy. In fact, it was in 1936 that I had published a book called Why Socialism, in which I had very strongly criticized Gandhiji's philosophy, particularly of trusteeship, in which I have now come to believe as perhaps the best solution of the problems of property which the world, which human society is facing, which problem I don't think either socialism or communism or any of the isms has successfully solved. However, during those days I used to have arguments with Gandhiji, but I must say that in spite of my rather orthodox and strong faith in Marxism, I was a great admirer of Gandhiji because it was very clear to me, having watched him at the closest quarters, that he stood for the downtrodden, for the exploited, and his whole life was dedicated to their service. I think the struggle for Swaraj meant to him essentially a struggle for the upliftment of the downtrodden and neglected millions of India and also thereby of the world. And that was the cause why I had this deep respect for him. I also had great respect for the practical qualities of Gandhiji, because it became very clear to us who were political activists that no other political philosophy in the country was able to create the kind of mass movement that Gandhiji was able to do. Nobody was able to arouse the masses of India and mobilize millions and millions of people against foreign rule as Gandhiji was able to do. And as a Marxian socialist, I did recognize that if a revolution had to be brought about, it could not be done by a few young men throwing bombs or shooting off at Englishmen or Britishers or foreigners. It had to be done by a mass movement and a mass revolution. And in spite of all our talk about organizing the exploited peoples, the kisans, that is the peasants, and the workers, and building up class organizations and bringing the class organizations into the national movement. In spite of all these fanciful programs and ideas that we had and other people had who believed in these and similar ideologies, nobody was able really to create that miracle which only Gandhiji was able to do. It is true that history helped India's the achievement of India's independence, the fortunes of the British Empire during the Second World War, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian National Army, also Sardar Bhagat Singh and other revolutionary fighters' activities, their sacrifices, all these things contributed. But there is no doubt in my mind that had not Gandhiji been able to arouse the masses of the country and mobilize them for freedom, for the struggle for freedom, I do not think all this put together would have been sufficient to bring India to the great gate of her freedom in 1947. I'm not saying that India would not have been free sometime later by other methods also, because other people also became free by other methods, but certainly not then, and I do not know what would have been the cost that India would have had to pay. Even under Gandhiji's leadership, as it proved, India paid a very heavy price in terms of partition of the country and the slaughter of millions of people and the emigration of still more millions from one part of the country to the other, and the misery and the troubles that they had to face. All that happened, but not because of Gandhiji. I think even at the last moment, Gandhiji's advice had been listened to, perhaps that catastrophe could have been avoided. However, that's no use crying over spilt milk, as they say in English. Now, during this whole period, I have seen Gandhiji in so many different roles, as it were. I have seen him in his ashram He didn't see millions of people almost fall at his feet. He wasn't blind to all that, but I'm quite sure it didn't go into his go to his head. It meant very little to him, and I'm quite sure that when he said that, sometimes he felt that they spat at him instead of trying to touch his feet. He was quite sincere. I also saw other traits of Gandhiji's character. For instance, the extreme care with which he looked after the health of people, the details of diseases into which he went, and the kind of treatment. He was a naturopath, though he did take and advise others to take medicine when the naturopathy failed. But as a general course of health regime, he thought that naturopathy was superior to any other pathy. And I think even in extremist case he would have recommended the same, but for the fact that the human system, having been spoiled by the administration of medicines earlier, probably did not or does not respond to naturopathy as it would have done if from the very beginning the human body had been free from these poisons, as the naturopaths call them, these medicines, particularly allopathic medicines. However, the care with which he nursed people, he was a very good nurse, Gandhiji was. And this was because of the real, genuine sincerity with which he approached any task, any job, whatever it was. There was no make-believe, there was no affectation. His whole life was lived as if it was a mirror. Everything was reflected on the surface. I have also seen Gandhiji address the largest crowds that were perhaps to begin with not very well disposed to listen to his advice, because sometimes, as any real great leader does have to do, sometimes he gave advice which was unpalatable. He has taken very unpalatable decisions in his life, for which he was denounced sometimes by his followers. But nevertheless, he, on the few occasions that I have seen him do this, he was able to carry the crowd with him. He had a way with crowds which nobody else I have seen had. Maybe next to him was only Mr. Nehru, but in quality there was a great difference in the way Gandhiji was able to move crowds, never to passion, never to anger, always pleading for control, self-control, for preparedness to sacrifice, to face death. And even then, in spite of the fact that it would appear that he was pouring cold water, there would be enthusiasm in the crowd. People will go back determined to die for a cause, and the cause, of course, in those days was freedom of the country. I spoke earlier of my being a Marxian socialist at the beginning. I recall two incidents which might be of interest. One was when the Congress Socialist Party in 1936, we had organized a Congress Socialist Party within the Congress. When the party formulated its program and policy, I had taken a copy of that to Gandhiji. After reading it, he put his finger on one of the items in the program and he said, "This is the one which to me means real socialism, or words to that effect." I don't exactly remember his words, but he picked out that particular item to emphasize as being nearest to his concept of socialism. And that item was the famous Marxian slogan of from each according to his capacities and to each according to his needs. The other incident happened when in Wardha I happened to be discussing socialism with him. Gandhiji half in joke and half seriously said, "Well, I was a socialist before you were born." To him, of course, socialism meant something which has to be lived and not something which has to be imposed by a socialist power from above. The ideals of socialism, the goals of socialism have to be accepted by men and practiced willingly by them. Then alone, according to Gandhiji, it would be socialism, and a society of such men would be a socialist society. He didn't believe in statism, as the word has later on been used to convey that meaning that Gandhiji had of the state trying to do things which people should do voluntarily. Anything done by force, even if it were by a democratic state, by legislation, he felt that even if it had the sanction of the majority, if the ideas or the values that particular legislation tried to enact, tried to enforce, if they were not accepted by the people for whom it was meant, it wasn't going to lead to anything worthwhile. It would be merely on the outside, and no real change would have taken place. This concept of Gandhiji's this concept of Gandhiji of socialism, in the course of my own mental evolution, I came to accept later, and now I believe that throughout the world the socialists or the communists have to accept this if they really mean to create a human socialist or a human communist society. We have seen how Mr. Dubček and his people were punished by the Russians and their allies for daring to put a human face on communism. If communism or socialism do not have a human face, I don't think that they can really be described as socialism or communism. However, I do not wish to go further into this at this stage. Now, during the 30s and the beginning of the war, we on our side, that is the Congress Socialists, continued to function according to our own ideas, but within the discipline of the Congress and within the Congress organization. But in the few years that we had before the war, I don't think we had succeeded to create a force in the country which could play an effective part in the freedom movement, independently of Gandhiji's force. And so it happened that when the war overtook us and the British imperial government dragged India into the war, which was supposed to be a war for democracy and a war against fascism and dictatorship, but the British government were not prepared to grant India the freedom for which they claimed to be fighting the Germans against. The question arose at that critical time as to what the Congress organization should do. Mr. Nehru was very much influenced by the anti-fascist movement and the anti-fascist slogans that had been raised by progressive people in Europe, and he was inclined to give support to the war. But it was Mahatma Gandhi who pointed out the inconsistency of a people who are themselves held under foreign dictatorship and are claiming to fight against another dictatorship. And therefore, under Gandhiji, the Congress launched upon different kinds of programs programs of struggle. It was at that time that I and my friends in the Congress Socialist Party came near to Gandhiji in spite of our still being socialists. I should mention here one fact. There had been during those years a change taking place in the minds, in the thinking of many of the Congress socialists in the country, excepting in the minds of those Congress socialists who secretly belonged to the underground Communist Party, the illegal Communist Party. I think it was from 1936 onwards that we began to hear news of the Stalin's repressions and his purges in Soviet Russia. And at the beginning, we were also reluctant to believe all that we heard, but then the evidence went on piling up, and it became very clear that under Stalin, Russian communism had just completely gone off the track, and that set many of us thinking. I had started by believing in a dictatorship of the proletariat according to the Marxian dialectics. But I came to realize, and many other of my colleagues who were Marxian socialists, there were others who were not Marxian socialists, who were socialists, whose inspirations had come perhaps from the British socialists or the French socialists, such as Ram Manohar Lohia or Achyut Patwardhan or Ashok Mehta, but there were others like Acharya Narendra Dev who were Marxian socialists like me. And it became very clear to us, those of us who were Marxists, that socialism and democracy, socialism and freedom could not be separated. Because if they were separated, socialism would end up in the kind of grotesque result in which it had in Soviet Russia, a complete vulgarization and demoralization and degradation of socialism. And that fact, the fact that we move towards democracy from dictatorship, brought us closer to Mahatma Gandhi. I don't think I had yet been converted then to Gandhiji's philosophy of action or thinking, but as I said, I and my friends came many steps forward towards him. There was a very historic session of the Congress held in my state, Bihar, at a place called Ramgarh in the Hazaribagh district. Just before that session, where my wife was the captain of the women volunteers, by the way, I had been arrested for an anti-war speech which I had delivered at the Steel City, Jamshedpur. And on the way, when the police were escorting me from Patna to Jamshedpur for my trial, I wrote a draft of a resolution which I wanted to be passed at the Congress session at Ramgarh, and I sent that with through a friend of mine with a message to Gandhiji. Gandhiji liked that resolution very much, but he was not able to persuade the working committee to accept it on the ground that the working committee put forward the ground that there should be only one resolution passed at the Congress session, the resolution for declaring a peaceful struggle against the British government in India. And there should be no other resolution passed as to the goals which my draft resolution had tried to formulate, for which that struggle would be launched. My reasoning was that the Congress was going to pass a resolution calling upon the people of India to fight the British power, and that was an appropriate moment when the Congress should tell the people what they were being asked to fight for, what would Swaraj mean for them. Well, Gandhiji, having failed to get the resolution adopted, published it with his own commendation in his weekly called the Harijan, of which I was very proud indeed. Well, after my trial, I was convicted, and after I served my prison sentence, I was released, but only for a few months, I think hardly 2.5 months, when I was again arrested, this time in Bombay, and taken from here straight to a concentration camp at a place called Deoli in Rajasthan. This was a concentration camp for mainly the communist prisoners, because that time Russia was in spite there was a the Hitler-Stalin Pact at that time, and under the Hitler-Stalin Pact, the communists were anti-British and, if anything, pro Germany, because that happened to be Russia's policy. This policy, of course, changed drastically when Hitler attacked Russia. Then it became, according to the communists, a people's war. However, at that time, the Deoli camp was, this was in 1940, December, I think, when I was taken to the camp. The war was still, I don't know how they explained it and but it was, I'm sorry, the war was at that time a people's war, but later on it became an anti-fascist war. However, the camp was a concentration camp for them, but there were also some odd revolutionary prisoners. I mean, prisoners who believed in violence. They were also there, and I was taken there and I was confined to that camp. It was while I was there that I tried to smuggle a letter to the acting general secretary of the Congress Socialist Party, Purushottam Trikamdas, who is today one of the renowned advocates at the Supreme Court of India at Delhi. This letter, of course, was captured by the officers of the jail, and my attempt to smuggle it failed, and it was later on published by the British government in the dailies of India. And again Gandhiji in a way came to my rescue, because in many circles, in Gandhian circles, I have almost said so-called Gandhian circles, I was being attacked for having done something which was very improper. In that letter, among other things, I had indirectly suggested that money for the revolutionary movement outside could be collected by unorthodox means, by violent means I meant, of course. And for these things I was attacked in many circles, as I said. And Gandhiji defended me by saying that how are these people, the British government, justified in condemning me, condemning Jayaprakash Narayan, because the British themselves and the British government themselves feel, they themselves believe in massive use of violence. How could people who believe in violence, who practice violence at such a large scale, condemn a patriot who was also advocating use of violence? And that statement of Gandhiji, which was published in the Harijan again, at least shut the mouths of those on the Indian side who were attacking me for something which was against Gandhiji, against non-violence, and weakening the movement, therefore, etc., etc.